are going to try to cover 3 chapters here, 5 through 7, as the tables turn. And let's do, by the way, you know, Esther's been made into multiple movies. There's the 1960 version with Joan Collins starring as Esther. There was the 1999 version of it. I didn't see that one. Don't know much about it. Read the reviews. There was a 2013 PureFlix version of it called Esther, the Book of Esther. It's even been made into a musical. And probably, in my opinion, the best one came out in 2006, One Night with the King, where we got the little graphic for tonight now. So it's pretty close, by the way, pretty biblical, pretty close. So there is a little bit of Hollywoodism in it. I think they have her chasing in the rain at the most dramatic moment, which didn't quite happen. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward right down the line. So a lot of visual options out there for you. Let's do it. Now, if this was a mini series, and this could be one, you'd always have your flashback. Here's what's happened on last week's episode. So let's do a little recap of where we are and what's happened in Esther. So you got, first off, the setting for this is Susa, Iran. Remember, Daniel was in Babylon. He survived the whole Babylonian Empire for 70 years. He outlives them. They get taken over by the Persians, and the empire shifts from Babylon over into Susa, Iran. So that's, and this fortress of Susa that shows up throughout history, it shows up throughout scripture. That's where the whole thing just about takes place. Xerxes is the king, and he is planning this 4-year battle to take over Greece and into Europe. And so during that process, his queen didn't quite follow his directions, and so he kicked her out, and that was all what chapter 1 was about. And then Mordecai and Esther enter the scene, and they are part of the Jews who chose to stay in Persia. Some of these guys went back to Jerusalem, some stayed with the empire. And so they stayed with them. And you got Mordecai, who was part of, he was actually part with Daniel that was way back in Jerusalem. He got taken into captivity. And then this is his cousin. So chapter 2, Mordecai helps Esther become the new queen. And we're going to look at some of this right here. Like when you just stop and think about it, why did Esther get chosen? So he kicks Vashti out, has a beauty pageant, picks Esther, right? Now, this is not just a little small town pageant, if you want to use that kind of terminology. This is the entire empire, right? This is from India to Egypt. So I'm sure there were quite a few young ladies vying to become this position. And the queen, we're not talking about the Queen of England. We're talking about the first lady of a world empire. This is the most powerful position for any woman on the planet. She might as well be trying out for Miss Universe. And so she gets chosen. Why? I mean, I'm sure Esther was quite attractive, but it's probably more than she was just pretty. I'm sure there's a lot of pretty young ladies, and I'm sure a lot of moms were trying to push their daughters into getting this. But why her? What do you think it was? What is the it factor? Favor. Bingo. There is a great correlation. To me, Joseph, Daniel, and Esther are all kind of the same person. People found favor with them. Joseph, apparently a really good looking guy, right? Women were hitting on him, but it was more than just that. He was placed in a position ahead of time to save his people. And Daniel, why did they pick these 4 guys? They slaughtered a lot of people in Jerusalem. They took these 4 teenagers. What did it say about them? They were the 4 best looking teenagers. They were smart. They were the best. They chose them. So, but there's something about the favor of God, and she's positioned there for a reason. So yeah, I'm sure she was an attractive gal, but it's more to it than just that. Mordecai stops, by the way, in chapter 2, stops his assassination attempt on Xerxes, and it goes unrecorded. It was supposed to be documented and politically taken care of, and it didn't. And that's going to come to play in tonight. Haman is elevated to prime minister, this guy. And then during this process, Mordecai refuses to bow. He's supposed to kneel, right? Haman retaliates by having the Jews assigned to be annihilated in chapter 3. Mordecai then warns Esther about what's going on. She's reluctant to help at first. And then Esther sends word, and at the end of chapter 4, to Mordecai to have all the Jews fast and pray. Doesn't mention the word pray, but it sure sounds like it. And she wants them to do it for 3 days and 3 nights. Which is interesting. And that's where we left off. That was a cliffhanger for last week's episode. So tonight we jump into this. By the way, just to give you perspective, this picks up kind of after the lion's den situation, after Daniel chapter 6. And remember, the Persians came in. and they sent some of the people back to Jerusalem. So a remnant of the Jews got to go back, rebuild the temple, rebuild the city. Some went with them. Only about 49,000 actually went back to Jerusalem. And so you can read in Ezra what happens then. The rest of them went with the Persian Empire and to Iran. So this is the remnant that didn't go. So this is kind of where we left off last time. So Mordecai's he's been relaying messages. He can't go see her. He's relaying messages to her of what's going to go on. And she is reluctant. And then he tells her in this, when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. You know, they're going to find out you're a Jew. She's hidden that she's a Jew, but eventually it's going to come out. And if the law says all Jews are killed, you're a Jew. Don't think you're going to get out of this. And so here you go, verse 14. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. It shows an incredible faith of Mordecai that he would say that, you know what, it's going to happen whether you help or not, you know, and you're my cousin, I want you to help, but, you know, God's going to take care of his people. But you and your father's family will perish, and but that you have to roll position for such a time as this. And that word for such a time as this is going to come back to play. So, and I want you to think about that. For such a time as this, that's one of the key words of this whole book. She was placed in that position. And I want you to think about this. So far, we've been really reading this really interesting story with a lot of little twists and turns. You ain't seen nothing yet, but I want you to start thinking about the spiritual lessons that come from it. She was placed at a certain time for that. Question is, were you? Why were you born in the year you were? Why are you living in Little Rock? Why are you living in this century? Could God have, do you believe God created you? You either believe you were born randomly, or you believe that God is your creator. If he created you, why couldn't he create you 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, on another continent? He chose you for this time and this place, and your question and the great adventure in life is to figure out why. Even secular, you know, philosophers say the big questions are, who am I? How did I get here? Where am I going? Right? Even secular people recognize that. But that's a spiritual aspect also. So why are we here? And maybe you were here for such a time as 2022. So chapter 5 here, I title it, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Give you a tip. It's Haman. He's going to come to dinner. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. So get this right here. One of the things that movie, A Night with the King, they have her running in the rain. No. That's the only thing that's not exactly accurate. She went and got dressed up. She was in her whatever apparel, but she's now changing. She's been, it was a garb of woe, how they, you know, the sackcloth and ashes, that's how they kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? That's when they were mourning. There's another word I was looking for, but it's that they were in mourning. Yeah, that's what it was. But she changes because she's going to go see the king. So she dresses up for this. She puts on a royal attire here. But I want you to know what it says on the third day. This is the 17th day of Nisan. This is the Hebrew calendar. This is one of their months. It's the first month of the year. It's the 17th day of Nisan. And it's interesting that this always comes up. Is this just a random day? Is it just a coincidence that this particularly happens on Nisan 17th? Let's see what other Bible events have happened on that time. Oh, by the way, the flood of Noah ended in Genesis 8 on Nisan 17th. The Jews enter Egypt and escape the famine. So Noah and them escaped the flood on Nisan 17th. Jacob and his family escaped the famine on Nisan 17th. All the Red Sea parted and they escaped from Pharaoh on the Nisan 17th. Also, Israel enters into the promised land. God kept them outside the promised land to a certain day and say, now go into Israel. Remember, they had wandered for 40 years and on a certain day enter in the promised land. And so they escaped Moab and Ammon and entered the promised land. Also, Hezekiah cleanses the temple. It's a more important event than it might sound like. An important day in Israel's history where he cleansed the temple, also on Nisan 17th. Esther's going to save the Jews on Nisan 17th. All these things, I'm just going to give you a snapshot of this. All these things happen on this day. It's purely coincidental. It's random. They just randomly all happen to be this new beginning for Israel every single time, but it points to something else. It points to the ultimate Nisan 17th, because the whole Old Testament was for what? It pointed to who? Jesus Christ. Guess what day he was resurrected? On Nisan 17th. it's pointing to, right? There's no random dates in the Bible. And the entire Old Testament pointed to Jesus. So there's more of these, but I want you to get this concept of this is God basically saying the first fruits. There's this Jewish festival, the first fruits, they've been celebrating from the dawn of time. And we think of it as some Jewish feast. It has nothing to do with us, right? Passover has nothing to do with us. By the way, we're going to celebrate this holiday coming up next month. What's it called? Easter. Where's that in the Bible? Oh, it's not. Interesting. But you know what is in the Bible? Passover, the day he was crucified. Why don't we celebrate that? Why don't we even mention that? Why do we purposely from the pulpits not mention Passover, but always mention Easter? Interesting. We'll get to that. But this first fruits, this is all set up from Passover to the first fruits. This was the plan of God that's showing all these are new beginnings. The flood of Noah, that was the new beginning for mankind. It was a new beginning for Jacob and his family. It was a new beginning for the Hebrews coming out of Egypt. It was a new beginning into the promised land. It was a new beginning for Hezekiah. It's a new beginning as Esther saves the Jews, and it's a new beginning for us as Christians when he is risen. So all that. Interesting study. I don't want to delay us, but also notice she said it stood in the inner court. The entire fate of the Jewish race hinges on this moment. Remember, by law, she enters in there. It's like you storming into the White House, the Oval Office. You just don't do that. Secret Service is going to take you down. There's a chance here that she could be killed. Now, we have the knowledge of knowing that she's not, but she could have been killed, and that would be all she wrote. So verse 2, when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her, and he held out the gold scepter that was in his hand. So he has spared her in so a sense, and he points out the scepter, says she comes. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. So he's glad to see her, hasn't seen her in a month, and he's pleased to see her. And so she gets to, petition him for something. And what's she going to ask for? If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. So she's asking for a banquet. So she's here to submit her requests, but she's going to ask for a little dinner with him and this guy named Haman. Okay. Bring Haman at once, the king said. This is great. Hey, man, we're always looking for a party, and this guy loves to drink. Let's have it, so that we may do what Esther asked. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, now, what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. So now here she gets to, what's she going to ask for, right? Esther replied, my petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. So her answer is, I want another banquet. Huh. Okay. Why would she ask for that? So she has a chance. Now, remember, keep in mind, everything's hinging on this one moment, right? So she asked for another party. So why a second banquet? There's a lot of theories about this. Like, why would she delay it another day? Well, mostly because that's going to fall on Nisan 17th. And I think there's probably something to that. But here's something else. Some theories are she got nervous, kind of lost her cool. She didn't feel like it was the right time. Maybe Xerxes was not in the best of moods at that day. Maybe there's a supernatural intervention. Maybe God intervened here. Why? Because whatever the reason, there's going to be a 24-hour interval that will be essential for God's plan to take place. Because as of right now, she would have problems pulling this off. Something's going to happen that night that's going to change the game for all this. So this 24 hours turns out is essential for God's plan. And also Haman's being set up. He doesn't realize he's being set up. He's pretty pumped because he got the chance to go to the banquet of banquets, the two most important people in the world. He gets a chance to have dinner with them. So he's excited, but he's being set up here. Here's some other possibilities. Maybe the king was unprepared. Maybe the throne room was too public. You know, there's other people around. They got the royal staff, and her plan might backfire. So she wanted only Haman to be there. So there could be, that's just some possibilities to throw at you. But there's perfect timing. A sleepless night will lead to a golden opportunity set in motion from 5 years earlier. what we read back there in chapter 1 is going to come into play now. And God's timing is perfect, even when you don't realize it is. So verse 9, Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. This guy's pumped. He gets a chance to he is in exclusive company. And here you go. He's excited. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Let's start with this. Why do you think he's so happy and in high spirits? What is he happy about? He's been named prime minister, basically, that he's second in command. That's pretty good. We know that he set this whole thing in motion by giving a massive amount of silver and probably millions of dollars worth of money. So he's got wealth. He's got 10 kids. He's got a large, prominent family, lots of money, lots of power, lots of political status. Life is good. And now he gets to go hang out with the king and queen. He's in high spirits. And I think as you go along here, it's probably pretty easy to see that Haman probably saw himself one day as a successor to the throne. I would imagine. I know it's hard for us to envision people in the political sector that would one day like to be president and would vie for the presidency, but I kind of see Haman in that kind of regard. But he's in, so why is he so happy right now? But notice he's filled with rage. Why? Why is he so angry? He was just happy. Oh, wait a minute. The whole empire bows down to me and I've got a massive amount. I've got a fat bank account and the whole world looks up to me, but one little old man won't bow. And I'm just going to fill me with rage. Not angry, not upset, not a little mad, rage. One guy. Apparently. He's been promoted to prime minister and the entire empire bows before him except for one elderly man. So we're going to look at this guy here in a second, but nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife. So he is so upset. He gets his family together, invites all his friends over for dinner, because he's not well, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and there are 10 of those guys. And these are, by the way, the last of the Amalekites. They were the King Agag and all that we talked about, I think, in the last lesson. They're going to get wiped out in the end. And so his sons, they're not going to survive us. And all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. So he's bragging. He's feeling good about himself. He is being set up in a major way. But all this gives me no satisfaction. Pause. Isn't that interesting? Massive wealth, political power. Everybody is in fear of you for the most part, and yet he has no satisfaction. Why? Because as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, isn't that interesting? Wow. This gives me no satisfaction. So let's talk about this. How close is Haman to you? I mean, if you're really honest with yourself and his feelings and emotions and his insecurities, how close is that? Hopefully not very close at all. But let's look at this right here. Haman is so obsessed over this one elderly man. It's one thing in life. You got so many things going good for you, and yet there's one thing that trips you up. It's like the 99 good emails that I get, but then there's that one email in which the person hates me, right? Do I focus on the 99 good ones? No, I do not. I focus on the one freaking email that says, I want to quit your gym and I hate this place, blah, blah, blah. Okay, why is that? See, we focus on the one.
The one lost sheep.
That's a good point. Yeah, thank you. But also, what does it do, though? He can't even experience the joy of his position and his wealth. And are we not a little bit like that? We get caught up on the little things. And it's hard for us to see the big things in life that we really got going good. It's like you got a family of 20 or 25, and 24 of them love you and adore you, but one is out there, the lost sheep, and you spend your time worrying over that. We're all like that. He medicates his anger and anxiety by inviting friends over with his family to brag over his political status, wealth, and the number of children he has. Interesting. I found this quote here. When little men cast long shadows, it's a sign the sun is setting. I love that. Like that, It's true. There you go. Behind the scenes, here's what's really going on. Remember, it's a spiritual battle. God sends blindness to those he means to destroy. he makes them blind. Haman had no perception of the influence which were working against him. And Jeremiah chapter 17 seems to suggest that God begins this hardness and blindness of the eyes for people that he plans on destroying. If you read Romans chapter 1, which could be some Romans 1, America in the 21st century, that should be the subtitle, because when you get to verse 18, it describes America. It's God's wrath, but it's not wrath like Sodom and Gomorrah wrath. And it's not wrath like we're going to see at the end. It's this other kind of wrath. It's the abandonment wrath. It's like, you're on your own. I abandon you. And from verse 18 on, it has these three. Hey, do we have a chair? Okay, yeah, we got a chair.
Sorry.
You are not interrupting. Come on in here. But starting in verse 18, you've got 3 times God says, and I will abandon them. And I encourage you, go read it. It is the United States of America. There's 3 levels. It starts with a sexual revolution, and then it turns into a homosexual revolution. And then finally it just gets into this stuff where he just turns them over to their sin, and I will abandon them. So that's a great study for you. Maybe we'll cover it one day in our journey through the Bible, but it's this abandonment wrath. God had given Mordecai the faith to be a hero. And Mordecai is kind of the hero of this, right? The unheralded hero. He had strengthened a reluctant Esther, and he had Haman killed by his own design. That's kind of what's going on. Verse 14, his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, hey, have a gallows built 75 feet high and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Whoa, his wife's going to help him out, okay? Then go with the king to the dinner and be happy. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built. A couple things, this gallows. So this is basically their version of impalement, right? It's the forerunner to crucifixion. The Persians actually invented crucifixion, wasn't the Romans. But this was their early on. You can kind of see the pictures, how they, their carvings kind of showed how they did it. It wasn't exactly like what we think of as crucifixion, but as a forerunner to it. Gallows meant tree, wood, stick, timber, stock, something like that. That's what they would hang them on. And they would, this was down the road, they would be the ones to invent crucifixion. And they'd pass it on to the Greeks and to the Romans. And it's a little bit like, it's similar. It's almost like the Alexander Graham Bell's, or was it Thomas Edison invented the phone? Who had the phone? Thomas Edison?
No.
Bell, okay, should know that, right? Bell, you should know that. But okay, anyway, so what's your part of Southwestern Bell? Youngman Branch, different competitors.
Yeah.
Well, never mind.
I was.
You were,
Yeah.
But think about the first phone, right? Like the first phone from there, that's just the forerunner to this, right? It's the evolution. This was their first trying out of it, but eventually led to that. And this is the earlier innovation of it. By the way, since we're on this, I can't talk about crucifixion in the Old Testament without pointing you to Psalms 22, which really sounds like Jesus writes it from the cross. First person, Jesus describing the cross himself 700 years before it was invented. It's really an amazing chapter. Write that down and go back and check that out. Okay, so chapter 6, I title this, oh, what a tangled web we weave. And that is so true. We get caught up in our own designs, and that's what's going to happen to Haman. The entire course of history for the nation of Israel was changed because a pagan king, hundreds of miles from the center of God's activities in Jerusalem, could not sleep. One sleepless night is everything. That is 8:28 of Romans right there. For all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, and that's what's going to happen right here. Okay, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep. Interesting. He just so happened couldn't sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. So fascinating. This book of the Chronicles, historiographers were assigned to the Persian court, and he traveled with the king wherever he went. And they documented basically his entire reign. So it just so happens that he can't sleep one night, and he gets this guy to come in and read it, and brought in to read it. It was found, recorded there, that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's officers, who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Remember, this is what happened. This was kind of like the cliffhanger in chapter 2, where we had a little story, and then there at the end, it was added that Mordecai thwarted this whole assassination attempt. But take note of this. Xerxes has been the king of the Persian Empire for 12 years now. He's ruled over every nation from India to Ethiopia. Of all the things that could have been selected to read in the records, this is the one that was chosen by the librarian. That's it. I mean, that's incredible. This all happened in Esther too. So a lot of things, he just so happens, he picked that book out, just so happens, that's what he read. It just so happens that Esther asked for one more day, right? And it just so happens that this is going to take place. Xerxes will actually die this way, by the way, in this assassination attempt. It's going to be Artabanus who will pop up, the captain of the guard, and one of the eunuchs. He will end up dying later on, just like that. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this, the king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. So it just so happened, this is 5 years earlier. So normally they get rewarded for it. There was an oversight, government mishap, just didn't recognize it, but it's all part of God. Remember, he couldn't get rewarded then. If he got rewarded then, this doesn't happen, right? I mean, it's God's perfect timing. These royal beneficiaries, this is what they were called. If you did something to help the king or the people enroll the throne, you were rewarded for it. Not only should Mordecai have been recognized, but these royal beneficiaries formed a special class in society and had their names inscribed on a special list. This happened all the time. It just so happens that Mordecai, by the way, didn't get noticed. Why did it not? That's your question. Should be an easy answer. For such a time as this. 10 points goes to Susan. Verse 4, the king said, who is in the court? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court. So he comes there first thing in the morning. He's pumped. He had that little party at his house. He's excited. He gets to go to this big banquet. And the one thing that's stealing his joy, the little old man that won't take a knee, he's got a plan for it. And he's built a gallows in his front yard, 75 feet high. It's set up. He gets to go to the banquet. And that little old man's about to be impaled because he's made it. He's made the weapon that will kill him. Great, what a plan. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in the court, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Whoa, okay. Well, now I told you, Haman, I think you can see, probably had eyes of one day becoming the king. And this is interesting. What should I do for someone that I'm delighted in? Wow. Well, apparently it's me because I'm the only one that's not the king and queen that's going to come to this dinner. Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? Like, love it. So he answered the king, for the man the king, so this is Haman, he answers him, hey, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe that the king has worn. You're not supposed to do that, by the way. Okay, that's supposed to be saved just for the king. Bring in the royal robe and a horse the king has ridden. Almost like he's the king, right? One with a royal crest placed on his head. So yeah, let's do that. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets so that everybody can see. Proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. That's what you should do, King Xerxes. That would be great. Great idea. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you've recommended. Isn't that like, can you just picture this guy? Gosh, man, like, okay, like, I don't know. I don't know. Go at once.
Somebody get to the house with a chainsaw.
Yeah, exactly, right. There's already been a 5-year delay for this to happen. And that's, so he's telling him, go take care of this now. This was supposed to happen 5 years ago. Get on it. Don't delay. Mordecai the Jew, it's believed that he said it that way because that's how it was recorded. He was actually recorded as a Jew. So that's interesting note there. So here's this turn of events. Haman's very own personal plot twist that he constructed, but God is behind the scenes of. It's a big time turn of events for this guy. And it's the ultimate irony. You cannot, I would put the book of Esther up against any Shakespearean classic. You can't write this stuff. It's just the ironies and the twists and turns that go in. Mordecai, who he hated, had to be honored by Haman on the very day he was planning to oversee Mordecai's impalement. Wow. He wanted respect from Mordecai, and now he had to give respect to him. Gosh. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai. I'm sure he loved doing that, and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. I find it hard to believe that he said that with a lot of enthusiasm. I'm sure that was kind of reluctant, right? And he's probably like blown away, like, I don't know what's happening here. Like, it's crazy. Afterward, Mordecai returns to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. So he's depressed. He covers his head. At the end of this, someone else is going to cover his head before he gets killed. It's going to be covered twice. First time in grief, the next time in death. And told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends, everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin. What's that got to do with it? You cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin. You need to understand, like these Persians, do you remember how they established the date that they're going to annihilate the Jews? Do you remember what they did? What, anybody? They cast the lots. Yeah, but they picked a certain date. Do you remember that? They cast the lots. They cast called the pur. They were very much into superstition. They believed the Jews were kind of a superstitious kind of group. The legends had been passed down. This is the group that wiped out the Pharaoh's army, and they went through the Red Sea and they conquered. Like, there's been kind of this kind of urban legend about the Jews, and that this God of Israel has protected them. So they were very superstitious, and you can see his wife's telling him, hey, those are Jews. You can't stand against them. You know, you're going to lose here. That was their belief then. The advisors. Now, your translation may say the wise men. He had wise men. So the Persians had this kind of a political class of wise men. And let's just look at this. This is what we think of as wise men. The Persian magistrates. It's where we get the word magi. It comes from the magistrates. And, you know, where do you see these guys pop up? Every Christmas, right? On Christmas cards. And if you were here when we had our little Christmas story, one of the other things, this is one, I always post this picture because it's one of the most ridiculous pictures ever, right? So Jerusalem has about 1 to 1.5 million people in it. That's about the size of the city of Memphis. Why would a city the size of Memphis be freaking out because 3 guys on a camel rode in? It makes no sense, right? No, they were freaking out because this political class had came in there, probably hundreds of them, and they were thinking they were for war. But the Persian magistrates, it was meant the Magi is what it is. And they were a hereditary priesthood of the Medes. Remember, this is a Medo-Persian empire. And the Medes had these wise men who would serve as advisors to the Persian Empire. Later on, they would become the kingmakers of the empire that succeeded them in the Parthian Empire. So they were part of this whole line that started with Daniel. Daniel, under Darius the Mede, was named the Rab Mag. That's the Rab Magi, the chief of the Magi. And if you study that, he was put in place. Here's a guy that knows the exact day of Jesus's birth, when he's going to ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. And he passed on this knowledge. And that's why when everybody was like, wait a minute, the Messiah was born? What are you talking about? We didn't know this. These guys from another country roll into town saying, where is he at? Where's the king? They knew, because for 400 years, this had been passed down, all from the lion's den to the Lord. It's fascinating. You study that in Daniel chapter 6. So notice, but also say you will surely come to ruin. So they basically believed the Jews were superstitious. Verse 14, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So this is a whirlwind for Haman. They got to rush him off because he's got to go to this second banquet, right? So here we go, chapter 7, a twist of fate. You Gen Xers, a nice little Olivia Newton-John reference there. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And as they were drinking wine on that second day, the king asked Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. So this is 3 times he's asked her this, right? First time she asked for a banquet. Second time asked for another banquet. And here it is. Then Queen Esther answered. Now keep in mind, it's King Xerxes and it's Haman. And Haman's having quite the day. And it's about to get worse. Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. Now I want you to know, I and my people, she's now just announced to him that she's a Jew. Remember, Mordecai said, keep that hidden. And now it's been told this. And Haman now realized, and I don't know, Haman's look on his face to realize that the queen's a Jew. He knows what he's been doing. I mean, he's got to be like, woo, wait a minute, what is happening here? And they're sold for slaughter and destruction. She's also explaining how our people have been bribed for extinction. And she goes on, though, says, if we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet. because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. So she's pointing that in there like, hey, listen, if we were just being sold as slaves somewhere, I wouldn't complain. I wouldn't say a word. Okay. We've kind of been slaves for 70 or 80 years. But this is different. Like we're about to be annihilated. And she's saying that because she's trying to be very respectful to Xerxes. This guy is psycho, right? Like literally when you read in the history books, we've seen him, he's kind of been erratic throughout the book, but there are stories about this guy. He lost a sea battle. His navy got beaten one time and he took the oars and went out and beat the ocean because he was so angry. This guy's not all there. Like he's a little out there, okay? And she knows that, he kicked Vashti out in chapter 1. Just, hey, get out of here, right? So she's trying to be very respectful. And she said, hey, listen, I would have waited if it was just us being sold into slavery. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? He wants to know right now, who is this? Because your enemy now is my enemy, my queen. Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? You'd love to see the camera pan right on Haman's face this time. Like
Hillary Rodham on me.
There you go. Yeah. Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing? Like this is good. Esther said, the advisory and enemy is this vile Haman. Can you see the look on his face? Then Haman was terrified, but he was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. So apparently he is so with rage. I got to get out of here. He's probably processing all this. Haman. Yeah. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to be to beg basically Queen Esther for his life. Haman's like, I'm in serious trouble. The king got up in a rage. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. So, whoa, the king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left, they covered Haman's face. So he comes in and Haman's probably, I'm just picturing like, please, right? And he sees that he's like attacking her. And as soon as the word left, they covered his face. That they is not Xerxes and Esther. These were the attendants, the royal staff. They saw it. They knew what was happening, and they covered his face for the second time. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the queen, said, a gallows, king, 75 feet high, stand by Haman's house. And so it just so happens to be in his parking lot. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. And the king said, hang him on it. Wow. Okay. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. You can't make this stuff up. And the fact that it's incredible, but it's true. Like it actually happened. Haman was an actual guy is incredible. Reaping what you sow. We see this all throughout scripture. It happened with Haman, but he's not the only one. We typically reap what we sow. And I can attest to that. I have sown a lot of things that I wish I hadn't have, and it's my own doing. Jacob killed an animal and lied to his father, pretending to be Esau. Remember that? Years later, Jacob's son killed an animal and lied to him, pretending that Joseph had died. Pharaoh ordered all baby Hebrew boys drowned. Pharaoh's entire army would be drowned in the Red Sea, chasing the Hebrews. David took his neighbor's wife and committed adultery. Later on, his son Absalom would take David's concubines and openly commit adultery with them. David kills Bathsheba's husband. Then 3 of David's sons gets killed. Paul, then Saul of Tarsus, cheers on the stoning of Stephen. Then Paul is stoned at Lystra. And it goes on and on. The mills of God grind slowly, yet they grind exceedingly small. Though with patience he stands waiting, with exactness grinds he all. Psalm says this right here. Whoever is pregnant with evil conceives trouble and gives birth to disillusionment. Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made. The trouble they cause recoils on them. Their violence comes down on their own heads. I will give thanks to the Lord because of his righteousness, and I will sing the praise of the name of the Lord Most High. It suggests that we get what we sow. All right, so look here. Next week, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to finish off the book, chapters 8, 9, and 10. I want you to read that. And I want you to look for the spiritual. We've been going through a story, and it's an exciting story. And it's not done yet, by the way. There is a final challenge because, yes, Haman's dead, but the story's not over with. Here's the final challenge. Xerxes put something into print. Remember, it's the seal, the ring that was sealed in clay. That's an official Persian law. It cannot be undone. Once it's put into action, you can't undo it. Even though you're the king, it's not like Nebuchadnezzar, who was all powerful. He's not. If you remember back in Daniel chapter 6, the lion's den situation, Daniel gets tricked, capital crime, you get thrown in the lion's den. And remember, Darius was trying to find a way out. He's the one that made the law, but he doesn't want Daniel, but he can't get him out, right? Same thing here. Xerxes, he doesn't want all the Jews, but like, this is his queen's people, right? But the law's been signed and he can't unsign it. So some things are going to have to happen. Otherwise, we're 3 months in. There's in 9 more months, the Jews are marked for extinction. The law is going to go out and they're going to slaughter all of them. And Xerxes can't undo the law. So something else is going to have to happen, and God will have to intervene somehow. And I'm sure he will. Tune in next week for an exciting season. Here's something else. In 2 weeks, though, we're going to wrap up the story. We're then going to take a week and do the story behind the story. You're going to see where God was this whole time. It's one of those things. It's like the holographic picture I always like to refer to. On the outside, it's this picture, but the more you look, there's something behind the picture. God is been in here in some incredible ways, and it will show you that this could not have been written by a man. It had to be of divine origin. Not here on earth, but extraterrestrial. So we'll cover all that.